manufacturers of any type of building material. I suppose people might be forgiven to feel that Pre-Conco might be caught in that, but if you get tax concessions and everything, you wouldn't need to have a tax clearance certificate that worries you. Messieurs, musicians, the people that crop over need to learn this, singers and entertainers, nightclub or discotheque operators, nurseryman or plant sellers, nursing assistants, organ builders. So piano man in trouble up by me. Private inquiry agent, taxis, I want to repeat it, taxis. Taxi men have to make sure, taxi men, if you don't pay your taxes, none of you can work come February 1 next year. Not one of you. Not the ones for the cruise ship. Not the ones opposite Parliament. Not the ones in Lower Broad Street. Not a single taxi operator who is not registered. And then, this above all else, this is classic, because you know there's a Haitian man that comes into Barbados every time there's a trade fair. I think the Minister of Commerce and the Minister of Manufacturing better tell him don't come back to BMX again. There's wonderful Haitian art selling at BMX. Anybody who goes will see it. Because the last one is transient traders. That is to say, a person who is not ordinarily resident in Barbados, but who visits for the purpose of selling or procuring orders for the sale of or furthering or promoting the sale of goods manufactured or produced outside of Barbados. So we have gone extraterritorial now. Mr. Speaker, let's get real. And let me spend 2 minutes explaining the history of this legislation. This legislation was passed, yes, by Tom Adams to register so that there would be a register of all businessmen, tradespeople, and professionals in the country, so that the conduct of commerce could be carried on with certainty. When the legislation was first passed, and the Prime Minister ought to remember this, because he claims to be a man of history, persons who did not register could not sue in a court of law. Correct? Give Jack his jacket. They couldn't sue. And the Democratic Labour Party under Errol Barrow in the 1986 election determined that that was too high a burden for that list of people that I just called out to carry. That it was perhaps not the best thing to do, and therefore one of the first things that the Democratic Labour Party did in 1986 was to amend the law to remove the restraint on those tradesmen, professionals, and businesses being able to sue if they fail to register. Now, there is no doubt in Barbados that the government has a revenue problem. And there is no doubt in Barbados that people are smelling hell. They have serious cash flow crises. And while there may be some people who may relish the fact of not paying their taxes, the majority of people are prepared to pay taxes in Barbados. And they want to. But the cash flow or the desire to keep people employed has precluded some of them from being as prompt in these harsh and difficult economic times. A modern government of Barbados cannot now come and inflict on the people of Barbados a fate that is worse than the fate inflicted by the plantocracy on the workers of Barbados prior to the 1950s. And what am I saying? That one of the challenges that Grantley Adams had in this country, in this parliament, from this site, 60 years ago or more, was to pass a piece of legislation called the Protection of Wages Act that removed from the plantocracy and merchants in particular the ability to deduct willy-nilly from people's salaries, because they understood that whatever else a man has done and however much he owes a man must be able to pay to live at a basic level for food and for basic things that he needs to move from day to day. And Grantley Adams goes down in our history books as one of the greatest, the father of democracy, not only for the work he did on universal adult franchise, but for the suite of labor legislation that he passed, central of which was the Protection of Wages Act, to make sure that people could carry home a salary after working. And you know why this was important, sir? Because this was a society that was a slave society where forced labor without pay was its hallmark. Now, for a government on the eve of the 50th anniversary of independence to now not seek to deduct, as they can do under the laws through garnishment, because if you owe the state taxes, you can garnish. If you owe the state taxes, the state has other powers under the laws to deal with it. For a minister born after independence in this country to now say that a person should be deprived of the right to work if they cannot get a tax clearance certificate is to reflect a level of callousness that is worse than that of the plantocracy and the merchants of the 1950s that Grantley sought to confront. Mr. Speaker, I have had to say in the last 2 years, I have never thought that there's some battles that we would have to fight in this country again. But it seems as though we will. And I say to the Prime Minister, if there is one thing that you ought to do is to reflect how an Errol Barrow could amend this legislation to reinstate the right to sue, not to work, to sue. And a government that pretends to hold the legacy of Errol Barrow is going to come now and remove the right to work because somebody may have built up arrears. Wicked, innocent, or otherwise, the state has powers to deal with it. But let me also deal with it from the broader societal and economic perspective. I remember as a child going to Trinidad as a teenager, and people not being able to do many things in Trinidad because they didn't have tax clearance certificates. I remember that Trinidadians could not even travel in the absence of tax clearance certificates. And the rumors on the ground, sir, I don't want to hear because I cannot believe that this is the Barbados that I know and love. I was shocked 4 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, when a 91-year-old woman seeking to send a little trala to her daughter and granddaughter in England was asked to produce a tax clearance certificate before she could get the foreign exchange. You understand? 91 years old. But you know what's the sad part? Do you know that that woman has not worked for more than 50 years in Barbados? And even after she told them that, they told her they still need a tax clearance certificate. What has Barbados come to under this government? When I say to you that they are not fit to govern, I am not joking. And the only thing that tax clearance certificates has achieved any part of the world, Mr. Speaker, is black market and informal economy. How does a minister of finance expect anybody to take him seriously about how wealthy and healthy, give me a chance, Doc, how healthy and wealthy the reserves are? That's what he wanted us to believe. The reserves are better than they were in December. The reserves are always better in March than December. But yet, the actions of the central bank are such that they are making it more difficult to access foreign reserves in this country. Do you know, sir, that when he tells you that the reserves are holding, is he telling you that the central bank has more than $110 million in applications for reserves from 2014, 2015? You want me to repeat it, sir? That there's more than $110 million in applications where people cannot get approvals, some more than 6 months. And no matter what he says in here, it is those actions that speak louder than his words. Because this was a country where people were accustomed being able to access foreign exchange without trouble, without undue worry. And when you go now and compound it, it's bad enough to have the applications. You can understand. Boom, you're holding it, you're watching. But you can go now and tell people that they can't access reserves, or you're just implementing a law that existed all along. But the law was never implemented. The little 91-year-old lady never had to get a tax clearance certificate to give the grandchild or the daughter a little trala before. This is what we are reducing the country to. And as if that were not bad enough, the other political sleight of hand in the budget yesterday wasn't restricted to the $190,000 property taxes being reintroduced for them. Wasn't restricted to the $2 million, but take back the ability to work for the tradesmen. This Minister of Finance announced a $2.5 million education, scholarship, and grants. The Minister for Christchurch East begged for a little excuse and move with the member for St. James South and go and sit down and whisper in the ears sweetly and quietly to the Minister of Finance that the $2.5 million is less than the $3 million that he gave you after making you take licks for a year for trying to help poor people, children in this country. You could imagine that, Mr. Speaker? You really could imagine that? Now a minister comes in here having removed the aspirations in his last budget to ordinary Barbadians for tertiary education. The one thing that defines this country, the one thing that separates the Barbados Labour Party and the Democratic Labour Party now for sure. And what were the results of that August 2013 announcement of fees at university? That the university numbers dropped, Mr. Speaker, from 9,000 persons, students, to 5,000 students. From 9,000 to 5,000 at a time when people were incentivized to finish second year and third year. What will the numbers be at the university when the second year students and third year students finish in the next 2 years? And can 2.5 million this year, or 5 million next year, or 7.5 million the following year replace what was being paid to facilitate 9,000 Barbadian students? I have no doubt, sir, that there are ways to improve efficiency, but this is not an issue of efficiency. This is an issue of access. And don't tell me about willingness to pay, capacity to pay, sir, because in this country, capacity to pay does not equate to willingness to pay, neither here or any part of the world. So you may have a family, have the capacity on paper, but are going through a divorce. And the children are told, not now. Can't take it on. You may have a family where somebody else is competing for health care because they can't get the health care at the QEH. And they've had to go and send the mother or the father to Bayview. You may have a family where the man is a gambler or the woman is a gambler. On the paper, it looks good. Are we now saying that those children must be deprived opportunities in this country because we want to reintroduce means testing through the back door? Sir, life is about choices. I'm not saying that a government can afford to pay for everything, But I do know this, that intrinsic in the Barbados DNA is the ability to allow people to aspire, and his ability to allow people to be the best that they can be by giving them education. Even in the dark days of colonialism, this country of 166 square miles had over 200 primary schools in it. This country allowed 6 or 7 secondary schools to be accessible by ordinary Barbadians. All of us came from a train. Some got off a little earlier than others. Some have still not gotten off. And this is the one area in which this country, Mr. Speaker, is competitive above all else. It is the only area in which Barbados stands in the top 15 countries in the world in terms of competitiveness. And if you don't know how people behave, in many instances, some of the families that have been asked to go on back loans and you carry the forms to them. I have had students come to me and say, I beg my mother to fill out this form. My mother tells me that form hurting her head. She can't deal with it. She's too busy trying to keep things together. She ain't getting no unemployment benefits since it's done 8, 9 months ago. She can't deal with it. And I'm saying to you, sir, that a minister comes in here and parades that he has done something wonderful. He acknowledges at least the damage to enrollment. He acknowledges the error of his ways with the policy announced. And Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, through you, I don't know how a Prime Minister can seek to abuse a Vice Chancellor of the university for simply expressing a view that 90% of Barbadians feel, that this policy will decimate working class people, particularly working class women, and their aspirations in this country. This policy has to change. And it will be changed in the context of fiscal rectitude and fiscal stability. Because at the end of the day, sir, what are we talking about? A $35 million problem in a $4.3 billion government expenditure. $4.3 billion the government spending. And this is a $35 million problem. But I can... You want me to tell them where they can find it? You want me to tell them? I know they can find it because you're going to hear about it this evening. Stay tuned. But before I get to that this evening, you can stop short and find it with the slot machines. Would you believe, sir, that as the Minister of Finance purported to announce a tax yesterday on betting and gaming, which will really go on the gamblers themselves, that he did not have the courage to tell the country that he has not collected a cent in betting and gaming duties, fees from slot machine holders and arcade owners in Barbados since 2011? I want to repeat it. So as we send students to despair, the minister regrets the decline in enrollment. He gives you a $2.5 million scholarship program that is less than the $3 million that the member for Christchurch East Central. I am not in that. That the member that Christchurch East Central had $3 million, and to the member's credit, the member remained steadfast on the need to give out those bursaries. I think he gave $1,800, which could not close the gap, but helped in some little way. Could you believe that the Minister of Finance was foregoing $16 million a year, every year, for the last 4 years in slot machine revenue and arcades revenue? And if you are to add cage, the VLT terminals, which ought to be paying and cannot use a court case as an excuse not to pay, in my view, it is an additional $6 to $8 million a year. So a potential $24 million a year times 4, almost $100 million in this country, sir, foregone by this government in increased fees announced by this government. And you tell me that you can't pay $35 million a year when you're foregoing $24 million for gambling? What madness is that? Mau all kind of pow. I say to you, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister of Finance tried to relocate the blame for it yesterday. And I don't even think that the Prime Minister realized that he had done it, by telling the country that this responsibility is the Prime Minister's responsibility. Well, I would tell the Prime Minister to tell the Minister that customs responsibility is still his responsibility. $96 million foregone. I don't know how many of the cabinet colleagues know that. The member for Christchurch South says sort of, okay, they know all about it. I am glad for the admission, and therefore let me tie him to the hips. Because it means that this government has made its choices. Don't collect revenue from a select few. Impose the burden on the many. And I say to you that the irony of this will not be lost on the people of Barbados. But it wasn't only that. And when you put the $20 million in the betting and gaming, in the VAT, on the betting and gaming yesterday, who pays the VAT? It's not arcade fees. It's not slot machine license fees. You know, he's putting it back on the same consumers that he literally bathing with licks. The same consumers. But then, you know, sir, what better do you expect from a Minister of Finance who spends a long time telling us that we must fight chronic non-communicable diseases and then places a tax on milk? Places a tax on milk to make milk more expensive. More expensive, other than goat's milk, he says. And I don't know how much goat's milk we produce. Down St. Andrew, I suppose there'll be some who will be happy. But you know, sir, it wasn't only goat's milk. Sorry, it wasn't only milk that is taxed in this country. Can you believe that the Minister of Finance also proposes to tax other vegetables? He intends to tax mincemeat. How many Bajan families use shepherd's pie? I wonder how many of the gentlemen on the other side know how women is stretched food in this country to feed children. No, I really wonder. But you know what is even more? Do you believe that so disconnected is this Minister of Finance that on the list of foods that will now attract VAT is frozen flying fish? That this Minister of Finance could not even find it in his heart on the eve of the 50th anniversary of independence to exempt frozen flying fish from taxes in Barbados. You know, the same fish that on the coat of arms. But then again, sir, on the coat of arms is 2 stalks of cane, soon to be replaced on the 50th anniversary by elephant grass and mayamosi. River Cameron is called it. That's what Barbados has been reduced to under this government. Fish off of the coat of arms. Cane off of the coat of arms. I said fish. For the member for Christchurch, East Who hollering his dolphin, I want him to know that frozen fillet of dolphin also getting taxed. In fact, the fish that is not getting taxed, get out your knives. For all the young people who don't know how to bone fish, learn to bone it again. Because it is the fish with the head and the tail, the non-fillet fish, that has been left in the basket. Look, I am not trying to make light of these matters, Mr. Speaker. But the truth is that I am not satisfied that the Minister of Finance has done a sufficiently good job. I accept that there may be some foods that he may want to take out of the basket. I really do. But I do believe that this is a matter where consultation with the people of Barbados would have done him and us well. Because it is ordinary people who have to make ends meet when the year comes and when the day comes. And we now have a situation, sir, where yesterday's presentation was more about how do I deal with the political humbugs of the last year, the students that cursed the government, the people at the hospital that complaining and wanting to strike and not do anything but emergency cases, the waste haulers that stood up to our government only to be punished now, to be told that they too must enter that list I just talked about and will be subject to a tax clearance certificate, and if they don't have it, they can't work and carry waste in the country too. They're the only group being added to that group, and the only thing that distinguishes them is the extent to which they stood up to this government and for which they were harassed by being told to produce insurance documents and produce driver's licenses, and for which the Monday after one of them went to the town hall meeting or the meeting with the minister, he was asked and told that he was now to be audited by BRA, and another one received a town planning enforcement notice. This is the Barbados that we know. Where is the heart? Where is the soul of this country that accommodates tolerance, that accommodates dissent? This government has now distinguished itself, Mr. Speaker, that if you differ with them, as the Vice-Chancellor did, you are abused of speaking as if you are on Mount Olympus and conducting two governments. That if you criticize them, Mr. Speaker, you are prosecuted like the Nation newspaper has been prosecuted or threatened to be prosecuted, where the member for St. James South, the member for St. Joseph, and myself had to go to give a statement at District A on the prosecution of the Nation newspaper. Or where a teacher who speaks, a reverend who speaks at a People's Assembly, St. James Central, sorry, not South. It could as well have been South, though. St. James Central. St. James Central. Remember, sir, a priest, when he criticizes this government, is to be prosecuted under the general orders. A former professor at the university, when he criticizes and says this is the worst government, an opinion shared by 90% of Barbadians, again, he should be prosecuted with sedition. These are the kinds of things that cause people in this country to shake their head. And when you put on top of that $200 million more in taxes, the people want to know what is going on in Barbados. And these people have devalued what it is to be a politician and a public servant in this country. People long for the memories that they have of people who conducted themselves in different ways and want to. You know what they tell you? They say they don't recognize this Democratic Labour Party. That is a bunch united by a common purpose of self-pursuit. That's what Dems are telling you. But I want, sir, to tell you, sir, that when you look at the budget yesterday, you really have to wonder. You really have to wonder. Because, as I said, it was political hush measures for the people that disturbed the government. And then on top of that, Mr. Speaker, a few recommendations from the IMF tax study. That's all it was, you know. As I said earlier, there were no measures to stimulate, no measures to deal with any kind of jobs, no measures really for the tourism sector again. We did hear, sir, that there was to be a divestment of gems at a far state, and it was already at a far state. But I equally heard that the hoteliers do not know what that far state is in the BHTA. And the minister says with glee, it is not their business. But you know what is the business of the people of Barbados, sir? That the divestment of any state asset ought to be subject of public procurement and transparency. But I suppose, sir, if you have already started to divest state assets without advertising them to the public, the minister can take that glib and callous attitude that it is not the business of the people of the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association. Wouldn't you think that there would be hoteliers that might be interested in assets owned by the government and the tourism sector in this country? Are they now to be excluded from being able to bid on properties because a Minister of Finance who is in charge of a procurement project, who is in charge of delivering 40% procurement to the small businesses of this country, as this government promised? And he's going to get in here, sort of walk in and say it's not their business? Sir, no wonder a multinational corporation has written the Prime Minister complaining about the inability to be offered the opportunity to bid on the sale of Barbados National Terminals Companies Limited. The result might end up being the same. But the process of transparency must be adhered to. And you know why, sir? Sir, do you know, I want the people of Barbados to know this, because some people, especially the older ones, will know it. Do you know that you can't get rid of a broken down Land Rover with 4 flat tires from the Ministry of Public Works without doing a border survey? You know what a border survey is? A border survey allows for transparency in the disposal of any asset owned by the government of Barbados. But that is for small assets. That's not for the ones up there that are to be reserved for the 5 people on the list that I talked about earlier, who are not to suck salt in this country, and who are to be given a clear runway path in the name that we need private sector to do things. But when the 20 hotels that he's been promised from the BHTA, people gone and get commitments from the bank, they don't take that into account. When the 17 hotels only have taken 18 months to get what Sanders got on the 6th of November 2013, there's still no level playing field. And Sanders gets it not just for food and beverage, for every single consumable, printers, computers, nails, chemicals, you name it, call it. Plants, employees. Do you know that the employees who are not born in Barbados and living in Barbados from Sandals get duty-free cars, get duty-free furniture? So you may have a situation where a person working in the same position as a Barbadian working at the hotel next door to Sanders is working. You spent money as a parent sending the Barbadian to do a bachelor's and a master's in tourism because you feel your child should get the best chance. You want student loans to pay. But Sanders sends somebody from Jamaica who may not even have A-levels but who working in the hotel industry for 16. Nothing wrong with that. But the two must get the same terms and conditions. So the two now, one can go to, what do you call it, Dwellings and Ashley and get duty-free furniture, and the other one bustling in at Courts or Standards and trying to get a settee and a dinette set on hire purchase because the Barbadian does not get it duty-free. One driving the most luxurious of cars and the other one having to deal with a low-end vehicle because they do not get the car duty-free. How can you in a tourism sector of 50 years seek to create 2 Barbadoses, not just for the hoteliers and the operators, but now for the employees, so that Barbadians cannot wish for better for their children, because that same child on that same salary has now to pay out more money to live in this country than the expat who comes here to work for 2 or 3 years. And this is what, gentlemen, no, Mr. Speaker, and I am to hear and hear that what's the big deal? Why should the BHTA know about the sale of assets in the gems. But this is sale of assets home at, I don't even know where he lives, in St. Philip. Not home at him. This is the sale of the public's assets, the taxpayers' assets, the assets of the crown. And however much you may want to distort and contort about gems, that's not the issue. The point is that you recognize that there's a value, and if there's a value, let the public of Barbados have a chance to bid on the value. Don't tell us that it is an advanced stage of conclusion. That is what hurts the people of Barbados. That as you ask them to bear additional sacrifice, that there is a callousness and an arrogance that is attached to it. I think you should leave him to his own devices. He already knows the negative consequences, not just of bad health care, but of what can be done to force a person to need health care. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am saying to you, sir, that the additional measures that came in this budget had and bore no relationship to putting this economy back on path. And let me go now to some of the other things in the core of the macroeconomic framework. Because, you know, sir, we have all said, and I think there is no unanimity, we have been saying on the opposition side now for about 3-4 years at least, that the biggest cost that this government faces is the cost of debt service. We have been saying, sir, that this government's debt service is ballooning and that there needs to be a recognition that we need to refinance our debt. The estimates debate in this House distinguished itself, where the opposition, the independent member, and the member for St. Philip West, who has not only spoken to it, but has written letter after letter after letter that we see in the papers, distinguishing himself from a failed economic strategy of the member for St. Michael Northwest. But Barbados is now to be held ransom by a governor of a central bank and his sidekick, Sarah Andura, and in the face of evidence that is as clear for everyone to see, refuses to do that which other countries have been encouraged by no less a body than the United Nations to do, to refinance and put yourself on a steady footing again, such that you get the fiscal space to do what you have to trigger growth in this country again. Do you know, sir, and Bajans may not remember because numbers are not something that they keep, Barbados' debt service has gone from 2008 from 773 million to this year almost 1.7 billion, 1.683 billion. You understand that under this government, debt service has increased by almost $1 billion? Let me break it down. The interest cost of our loans that the government must bear out of current revenue has gone from $396 million to almost $700 million between 2008 and 2015. In 7 years, it has doubled, virtually. And the amortization, the principal, has gone from $505 million to $985 million. And you know what is sad, sir? Is that we have a Minister of Finance coming in here and talking about a primary surplus yesterday and trying to boast about it. But it is pointless to do so, sir, when there is growing debt service driven by both the growing interest charges that I have shown you, sir, annually, and growing amortization costs annually. Sir, you know that this same minister does not want to let the country know that the debt service growth is lower, that the revenue growth is slower and lower than the debt service growth. So your debt is growing at a quicker rate than your revenue. You can't play catch up. And this country has now a debt to GDP ratio that is in excess of what other countries in the Caribbean had when they chose to deal with their debt problem, when Belize chose to deal with it, when Jamaica chose to deal with it, when Dominica chose to deal with it, when St. Kitts chose to deal with it. And we, like camels, ostriches, burying our heads in the sand, or like camels keeping your head in the air. Choose which one. You have unanimity across the floor of the House, not the whole government, but at least part of the government. A former Prime Minister, the entire Barbados Labour Party. And everybody can see it for what it is. You cannot spend 69 cents in each dollar in debt service. Let me break it down. You cannot spend $1.7 billion out of $2.5 billion. Your wages costs is another $800 million for central government. Your transfers and subsidies are hovering at $1 billion. 1.7 and $1 billion is 2.7 and 800 million is 3.5. You are earning 2.5. And the dangerous part of the debt is this, that more and more of our debt is short-term debt. So that the rollover risk, Mr. Speaker, is considerably increased. The opportunity for a man to say, or an institution to say, I no longer wish to roll over my debt with you. I want to let it go. Give me back my money. And the government ignores the significant risk that it puts the whole country to by continuing to bury its head in the sand on a fundamental issue of refinancing. And then tells you about what? That this is a homegrown program. Which part of homegrown program? You mean this IMF program and taxes that he delivered yesterday? Taxes on small businesses, taxes on the registration threshold moving from 80,000 to 200,000. Heralded as something wonderful for small businesses. Page 8 of the IMF studies views this as a tax measure that will add to government's revenue. Add to government's revenue, page 8. And you know why it adds to government's revenue? Because the same small business cannot now claim back the inputs when it now registers at 200,000 instead of 80,000 in terms of VAT. Because they pay VAT on what they buy. And right now at 80,000, they can claim it back. When it goes to 200,000, they don't get to claim it back, and therefore government's refunds are reduced. But then again, government ain't paying the refunds either. And nothing can change from that. He was told in the IMF tax study to eliminate as many of the same deductions and allowances of which we just spoke earlier in here, under the income tax allowances, and that should give him significant revenue. Homegrown program? We mean a home-delivered program, not a homegrown program. This is an IMF-inspired document insofar as it relates to the tax measures that this Minister of Finance introduced. And why didn't we comment on it? Because when we read it, we realized that the remit given to the IMF was purely to raise revenue, not to trigger economic growth. And we have been consistent in this House by saying that we cannot tax our way out of this recession. We have to grow our way. And this government is now intending on drawing blood from stone. How can you get more money out of people? You know that 16,000 people went home in the private sector alone? And then we get the 3,000 and the dribbles that are now intended to go? And the minister tells us yesterday, look for more layoffs with the rationalization of his statutory corporations. We can't rationalize statutory corporations that end up with the same numbers that you had before. Who are you fooling? Who are you fooling? But when he's rationalizing statutory corporations, is he going to tell his ministerial colleagues, stop moving with the same board chairman when you shift ministerial portfolio? Because you got ministers who are tied and wedded to the same chairman as if they're in their hip pocket for some reason unknown to us. Is that going to be part of the reform of the statutory enterprises? This is not a homegrown program. This is tutelage from the towers, and this is IMF telling you what to do for revenue, not growth. And other people from within the fund and other people from within Washington readily acknowledge that this program had a remit for people to tell you just how to get as much revenue, not to look at the whole picture of the economy. And the minister, instead of stepping back and recognizing, you say, and we don't necessarily agree, we ain't going to dispute it because I'm tired of the numbers now. The numbers change according to the day. Just like the tourism numbers come back down yesterday from being the best in 25 years now to the best since 2008. I'm tired of the numbers. I have a simple thing. Show me the real economy. Show me the impact on households. Show me the impact on businesses. Because when you have a situation where the numbers can be as questioned as they are in the last IMF Article 4 study, and as different as between the central bank and the Barbados Statistical Service, then we have a real problem. And what is it, Mr. Speaker? The central bank's numbers say that this economy has only declined in real terms by 3% since 2007. And the Barbados Statistical Service says that this economy, the Barbados Statistical Service, the only entity authorized by law to collect statistics in Barbados, says that this economy has declined by more than 24%. This isn't 3 and 4% or 3 and 5, you know. This isn't 22 and 24, you know. How can a minister of finance know that the people who report to him as Minister of Economic Affairs view that this economy has declined by 24%, and the central bank person, governor, says that the economy has only declined by 3%, and the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are not calling for a major investigation for how two sets of entities supported and accountable to the government of Barbados can provide data 8 times different from one another in the middle of a recession. It is scandalous. And I say that this government is not fit to lead. It's not fit to preside over the affairs of Barbadians at this stage. How can you plan for the future if you cannot even understand the scale of the decline, the depth of the decline? Growth only comes from households and enterprises, existing ones expanding or new ones being created in terms of businesses. But instead, we are now to impose $200 million in new taxes on households and businesses that are tottering. I say to you, sir, that this is unacceptable. And when we look at the real issue facing the Barbados economy, we can solve it in this debate, you know. We really can, you know. But what does the Minister of Finance do instead? In pejorative language, in callous dismissal language. I hope the Minister of Agriculture heard him, because he wasn't here yesterday to have to endure the pain that we did. I don't know why he was absent yesterday. But he perhaps knew that the sentence was coming that accused him of being on a frolic. You understand that the Minister of Finance told the country that the Minister of Agriculture is on a frolic when he writes 20 and 30-page letters to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet about refinancing? But the sight of the Minister of Agriculture with his girth being on a frolic would have to be a sight to behold. If he said to me that the member for Christchurch, East Central, was on a frolic, I might more believe it. But the Minister of Agriculture on a frolic, If he said that he was like a train moving through, I could understand. Mr. Speaker, no, I ain't joking anymore. These matters are too serious, too serious. I know what makes it really bad, sir? This is not academic debate, you know. This is real people. Yesterday, I had a lady who came to see me since last week come back to me. She has been diagnosed with stage 3 rectal cancer. She has been told in this country where traditionally people have been able to expect that they can be treated at the hospital, that she can only get certain amounts of the chemotherapy at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and that she must now find, yes, she must now find $1,200 every 2 weeks for the next 6 months. And this woman works at the bottom of the public service in terms of salary scale. Mr. Speaker, the woman is 52 years old. The woman has 2 children. And tears came to my eyes, and I have committed to helping her raise the funds for it. Because nobody in Barbados at 52 should be given a death sentence because they can't find $1,200 every 2 weeks for chemotherapy. Nobody, and this is not a, I know that the habit has developed in this house for people to come in here and give speculative cases. This isn't a speculative case because when she first came to me last week, I mentioned it to the member for St. James Central. You understand? Yes, George, you know her. But it is like the family also, and with their permission, I've received permission from them to speak about it. I'm not going to speak about the minor details, but they came to me as a result of an incident with the police that caused them, through the member for City of Bridgetown, to come and see me. When a family comes to you, husband and wife, they're together, first thing. The youngest child that they have accompanies them. One is 29 and one is 30. The member for St. Philip North should know them because they went to you. The member for St. Lucie should know them because they went to you. The former member for St. George South, who is the Minister of Labour, should know them because they went to her. And these people produced documents to me, Mr. Speaker, showing that the house that they live in town has been condemned since 2009 by the health service people as not complying with the regulations in terms of garbage and as not complying with the regulations in terms of the prevention of rodents. This family has 3 children now, but they had 4. One child died at the age of 22 months old from a stroke. The mother has had to stop working in this country because the oldest son is in continuous problems medically. And anybody who knows the area of town from which they come, you have a heavy rainfall below sea level, out there floods, as the member for the city will tell you, in tutus. And you know, having gone to 4 ministers, husband working, you know, trying the best. And the government building all these housing units all about St. Michael. And for 6 years, these people cannot get access. A husband and wife, 3 children, 1 other child dead, and banding together as a family. How often do you see young people come to you as a family sticking together like that? This is what this debate is about. So when I ask you, Mr. Speaker, to allow me to speak to the urgent need for refinancing of the debt, is because the government of Barbados must have fiscal space again to respond to the needs of those 2 people that I just spoke about. The government of Barbados must have fiscal space to deliver affordable access to universal health care in this country. The government of Barbados must have fiscal space to guarantee the aspirations of ordinary people for their children to be better than they can be in terms of tertiary education. The government of Barbados must have fiscal space to do the things that which it must do to keep this country safe, to keep the public health of this country in good order, to stop chikungunya from arising and affecting an entire nation because the first people sent home were debushers or people working in drainage. That is what this debate is about when we talk about the need for refinancing, sir. And it is nothing different than we do in our personal lives. Hitherto, the notion of refinancing as opposed to restructuring, both refinancing and restructuring carried negative connotations. But the United Nations had a special summit because it recognized that where countries have a significant debt overhang, that countries have to be in a position, Mr. Speaker, to be able to deal with it. I say to the Prime Minister through you, Mr. Speaker, the position taken by the Minister of Agriculture, the Right Honourable Member for St. Peter, and myself and others on this side, I have been talking about it for 4 years. There is nothing nefarious about it. The Barbados Labour Party will still beat the Democratic Labour Party in the next election. We will. But do the right thing now for the right reasons. I am not frightened for that. And I know deep down, the Prime Minister, you may not be an economist, but you have a governor of the central bank carrying this country down the wrong road and the wrong path at 70 years old. You have given him, this government has given him a 5-year contract. Again. And if you pull some of the same board members at the central bank and talk to them quietly, they will tell you that the country will face its day with refinancing. But a Minister of Finance who can otherwise tell me, I really thought that we would have had a joint committee to deal, and even the thought of a committee, to my mind, is too late for that, to deal with the issue of refinancing. But having heard his language yesterday where he was prepared to throw the Minister of Agriculture to the wolves by talking about the frolic that the Minister of Agriculture was on for producing a 30-page paper arguing for refinancing and educating people the difference between refinancing and restructuring. I know he couldn't be talking about me on a frolic, and I know he couldn't be talking about the member for St. Peter on a frolic, so he could only be talking about the member for St. Philip West. Couldn't be. Because he has no jurisdiction on anyone on this side at all. So I know he couldn't be talking about me.